Hey everyone, welcome back to the Future of Work Weekly Report. I am the host, Zach Wright, founder and CEO of Grapevine Software. This series is where we talk about the hottest headlines and trending topics happening in the future of work. So anything from flexibility, remote, hybrid, AI, productivity, and our own platform. That's what we're going to be discussing in this series. So if you are a returning listener, thanks so much for your support. Don't forget to like and share this video with other future of work pioneers that you know or people that are on the fence. But today we are going to be discussing two articles that are, at least in my feed, where it's talking about Amazon's RTO, kind of the outcome of what that has been, and then also Microsoft's kind of response to Amazon, not necessarily directly, but we'll dive into the detail. But the difference in this video is that we are combining those articles together. So I read both of the articles. I think one came from Business Insider, one came from Fortune, but they are both on Yahoo Finance, I believe. And we'll link to those in the show notes. But let's go ahead and dive into it, because I'm going to keep this episode short so more people will be likely to listen to it. And it's kind of straightforward, but we do have our own thoughts as always. So let's go ahead and dive into highlight number one, which is Amazon's RTO, a disguised layoff strategy. Now, this is coming from the article titled Amazon's RTO charge is just layoffs in disguise, experts say. So what they talk about here is that Amazon's strict return to office, or RTO, mandate requiring employees to be in the office 5 days a week by 2025 has left employees frustrated, with many rage applying for new jobs. Experts argue that this RTO push is essentially a strategy to induce voluntary resignations, avoiding formal layoffs, making Amazon look bad. Now, if you are familiar with this series, then you know that the last 2 weeks or so, I did an art or a video in this series about how Andy Jassy chose to roll out the RTO mandate. And I kind of saw it as more of an organizational shift and actually applauded how he took this approach. Now, I did say that I disagree with it. I don't think that if you are able to, then you don't necessarily need to have your employees back in the office, especially not 5 days a week, like he's offering here or mandating here. And so it might be a little strange to hear me kind of shift my tone here, but we knew that this would happen. And I'm sure that any company out there that decides to do an RTO mandate understands what is going to happen after that mandate is rolled out. Now, the reason that I complimented Andy Jassy on this is the way that he delivered it. He was very specific. He gave pointers as into why they were choosing to do the RTO policy, and it kind of made sense. There was a disagreement where he said that we could see that being in the office has increased productivity, but there were no stats or actual charts that we could see, or research or benchmarks or outcomes that you typically want to see whenever you're making a decision. Now, he might have shared that inside the company, so I can't speak on that, but it didn't sound like the reason that they were going back into the office had much foundation to stand on other than the words that he spoke. And so we also know that whenever RTO mandates come in from companies, we see that the attrition skyrockets. People are choosing to leave. And in many cases, we've seen where leaders have been surveyed and asked questions on what was the real reason behind the RTO policy or mandate. And many of those leaders, this is coming from a Bamboo HR, survey, many of the leaders said that it was actually to get people to resign and avoid having that formal layoff. And that's what they get to here at the highlight number 1. And so just to kind of see the specifics on Amazon and how employees are feeling about this, there's a statistics that's pretty staggering. So it says 73% of Amazon employees are considering quitting due to the RTO policy. And then Nick Bloom suggests that Amazon is sacrificing talent and innovation for cost cutting, which actually goes 100% against how Andy Jassy laid it out in his memo to the company in this motion. And so it's not a surprise to people who, like me, who look at these articles every single week. That's not an exaggeration. And understand that any RTO policy at this time is basically going to result in higher turnover because people are going to leave on their own volition. And it's oftentimes because managers and leaders and executives plan for this, but it's often underestimated how many people are actually going to leave the company. There's one stat that we might get to a little bit later on where it says in the Bamboo HR, many of those leaders said that they were expecting a 15% turnover. This was for a specific company, I believe, as well. And instead of 15%, they actually saw 30% people leave the organization because of this mandate. And so the approach of this is just really kind of automatically putting a trust blockade on how your employees are going to feel working at that organization. They're not going to feel trusted. They're going to feel like you're trying to micromanage them. And then they've already adapted from the pandemic to now on how they operate. And so it's very difficult for people to be able to make that shift. And instead of making that shift, they go to another company that is open to taking them in, which will lead me to highlight number 2 here, which is the second article. And that article is Microsoft exec reassures staffs there's no plan for Amazon style RTO. And so highlight number 2 is Microsoft takes the opposite approach, kind of. I put kind of in there. They didn't put that in here. So the key insight from this section of the article is, in contrast to Amazon's rigid RTO mandate, Microsoft is reassuring employees that no similar policy is on the horizon. So long as productivity remains stable, Microsoft continues to offer remote flexibility, especially for new hires with promised hybrid work arrangements. And Microsoft's VP, Scott Guthrie, told staff that productivity is the key metric, and unless it drops, no RTO mandate will be imposed. Many employees in Microsoft's cloud and AI group will still work remotely at least half the week. And so you can say that Microsoft takes the opposite approach. And the reason that I say kind of, now you understand, because it's only based off of productivity. Now, the article or the writer of the article tried to reach out to Microsoft and get a response. They didn't get a response by the time of publication, but they wanted to know, how are they going to know if they are being productive by working from home or flexible or hybrid or not? And so I'm very interested to see what their response might be if they do respond. Or if anybody in Microsoft knows the answer and can tell me, reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can keep it anonymous. I just want to kind of get an understanding of, how are you going to track productivity? And I know Microsoft has tools built in that can tell you the time that people are emailing, the chatting, their own Microsoft Teams call, and all these other things, who they're working with, what are they producing, and so on and so forth. So maybe that's how they're going to do it. They're going to use their own tool, which would make sense. but what are the actual metrics? Because using your tool and having specific metrics are two different things. You have to have the tool, yes, but then you have to have the metrics that you're pushing towards. What is the threshold? Are we not productive whenever the majority of people on Fridays stop working at 12 p.m. their local time? Or is it more so based off of we've had delays in project timelines being met, or allocated budget is going over because of XYZ? These are the types of things that I wish some of these articles, and they tried, but I wish that these articles would really dive into, because the reason that these things are in the hottest headlines and trending topics is because they are pioneers of their industries. And so when Microsoft does something, or Amazon does something, or another big company does something, the people behind them will follow. And that's why people were a little bit nervous whenever Amazon said that they were going to go all in 5 days a week for their corporate employees. Some of the future of work people that I speak with, they were a little bit concerned seeing that, or mentioning that this could be how other companies take their approach to getting returned to office. But I want people to understand that whenever you do have that RTO, if you don't go through all of the things that could happen, you could have a stronger impact negatively to your organization. Like, Amazon was one of the companies that at the height of the pandemic hired and got to the point of 1.2 or 1.5 million employees. They hired over hundreds of thousands of people to come in and work there. And now what they're probably understanding is that they're so bloated and they don't need this. And part of my assumption is that in this is whenever Andy Jassy said that by Q1 2025, we want to have 15% less managers and have more individual contributors reporting to less managers. And so they had to understand that there was a lot of bloat in the organization. And rather than being a tech company that is doing another layoff, they're doing a return to office, and people are voluntarily choosing to leave the company. The part of that 73% of employees rage applying and looking to quit, I mean, that was based out of, I think it was like 5,000 something employees that were verified Amazon employees from a anonymous job board, Blind or something like that. And so this is what you have to think about, because Amazon has 1.5 million people, or they did, and they're going to lose a fraction of that. And that's okay, because they can still operate. But if you're a smaller organization, let's say 500 or even 1,000, and you do this and you have 20% of your workers leave, or even more, let's say 30%, then now what is that going to do? How is that going to impact you? Maybe even more, right? Some people can get away with it. It depends on the bloat in your organization. It depends on how you operate, but that's just something to consider. And we see each RTO, it's not like it's an outlier. Every RTO is producing this attrition. And so it's kind of strange to think that a different outcome is going to happen, right? By doing that, and just because maybe you're different, maybe you're Amazon. So anyway, the thing that I want to call out here is that Microsoft's approach reinforces the value of data-driven, employee-focused approach to work policies, measuring productivity and adjusting policies based on real performance data rather than blanket mandates just because they felt like they would be more productive. And that's actually going to help foster the trust and keep employees engaged. And companies should prioritize that flexibility without compromising on productivity. It's not an either or. It's a, and this is kind of what I was saying in the episode where we were talking about Amazon's announcement, is my approach to this, if it wasn't a layoff in disguise and it actually was an organizational transition or shift, would be to, let's make the shift by de-bloating what we did during the pandemic, and let's lower some of those managers and or get rid of or make them individual contributors. It's up to how they want to go about that. But the other thing is you want to be able to, or what I was suggesting is you approach the organizational shift in the way that people are already working now and see if it works. If it doesn't, then you actually have a more purpose driven and data driven approach to a return to office. Kind of like what Microsoft is saying. I still don't like that it's based off of productivity, but I can't think of anything better to base it off of at this time, right? And so basically what Microsoft is doing is the opposite of what Amazon chose to do. And they're saying, okay, we understand that you like working remotely, and we understand that we can work remotely. But what we are going to say is if there's any downfall in productivity, again, I would want to see those specific metrics and call them out and make sure that every employee understands what that is. Then we will have conversations about changing our policy, but not until then. So as long as everybody is getting their job done and we're moving forward, then we're going to stay the way we are. Now, let's talk about the broader impact of something like these RTO mandates and just the landscape of the future of work and work in general. And that takes me into highlight number 3. So tensions between white collar and blue collar workers. Now, in these articles, I didn't see the specifics labeled here. It was more so comments from some of the people that were interviewed or some of the clips that have been taken from people like Elon Musk. And that's where we're going to start with this key insight. So Elon Musk's vocal opposition to remote work has fueled debates around the fairness of RTO policies across different workforce sectors. While white-collar employees at Tesla are expected to be in office, Musk's approach mirrors the expectations placed on blue-collar workers throughout the pandemic. This growing tension is reflective of broader labor concerns as seen in recent U.S. dock worker strikes. So I'm going to go through all this so we can kind of tie it in together. So the stats that they call out here isn't necessarily about Elon Musk or Tesla, but it says blue collar workers demand compensation for their contributions during COVID, with strikes costing the U.S. economy up to $4.5 billion daily. Now, in the article, I believe, and if you read the article, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from my memory, I don't think that they've gone on strike just yet. I think that they've threatened to go on strike or say that if they don't receive XYZ for their contributions during COVID, then they will go on strike, and that will cost the economy up to $4.5 billion a day. So the thing that we have to call out here is that they're trying to say that white collar workers and blue collar workers are kind of going against each other. But I don't think that that's actually what's being said here. It's saying that the blue collar workers demand compensation for their contributions during COVID because they were out there. And in this quote from one of the dockers, maybe the manager or the leader, he was saying that my guys were out here during the COVID and they were during COVID and they were losing their lives. And so that's a great sacrifice, right? And people should be compensated for what they do. But the concept that white collar versus blue collar, and then they're kind of tackling each other, I don't think that that's accurate. We even see in certain studies that I've read in the past is that blue collar workers don't find it offensive, or they're not offended by white collar workers working from home or being able to work from anywhere or having more flexible hours, right? So this is a little misleading, at least from what I've been able to see from the articles that I've read over time. And so what I want to think about, or what I want us to think about whenever we talk about this, is This is actually saying that blue collar workers want more compensation for what they do and the risk in their line of work. That is different than being against remote work. So I just wanted to call that out here. And then whenever it comes to Elon Musk's approach to remote work, I think that he is very contradictory, and it's actually there's a hypocrisy to his statements, because he runs Tesla, he runs SpaceX, and he runs Twitter, or X. And he's not 100% there each day. He splits his time up. So at some point in time, he is working remotely or hybrid or flexible. And so he's not even listening to himself whenever it comes to these comments. And he's also not the best person to ask about these, because he has an outdated view of how we work. Now, I'm not trying to say that he's not impressive in his background and repertoire and what he's been able to do. But whenever it comes to this topic, I don't actually think that it makes sense for him to speak on it, given that he does run 3 companies and he's not there 100% of the time. So it's like the kettle calling the pot black, right? And so what I want to end on is just summarizing this and bringing it home. So the things that we talked about is Amazon's RTO mandate may lead to more attrition than anticipated, as we see, and they probably knew. And so employees are resisting that shift back to the office, and that might be what they wanted. Then we talked about Microsoft's focus on productivity over rigid RTO policies, creating a flexible work environment, boosting retention and satisfaction only if they can keep productivity. And then the last one is balancing the needs of both white collar and blue collar workers is critical to creating fair and sustainable workplace policies. Now, just to end on this last one is, whenever it comes to blue collar and white collar, a lot of people will look at us future of work people as maybe entitled, or it's luxury, or whatever the case is. And I've said it before in other videos, but I'm coming from a unique background where the majority of the work that I've done before I entered corporate was in the blue collared working world. So I worked with my dad growing up, and we did home improvements. So we would go to the person's residence and we would build the shed, we would change the windows, we would put on siding, we would do roofing. And then I also worked in the factory where we did roofing 8 to 10 houses a day in a factory line. And then after that, I worked as an operating room assistant where we cleaned up after the surgeries. We got patients and transported them. We took specimens to the lab. And then I also drug tested people who were overcoming addiction. And then after I graduated from college, I was able to get my first corporate position. I worked 100% in the office. This was in 2017. And from there, I worked in the office 100% up until the pandemic. So it's not like I'm coming at this with golden tullets or rose colored glasses or anything like that. I understand the blue collar atmosphere. And to me, it actually is inspiring to know that if I can move up the ladder, if I want to, some people don't want to, but if I want to move up the ladder, then I have the opportunity to be able to work from home. But there's also blue collar workers out there that could potentially work from home, or we could find a way to be a little bit more flexible in how we approach this, right? If people work Monday through Friday and they work 8 hours a day, what if we transition to Monday through Thursday, 10 hours a day, and then you give them the 3-day weekend? And so there's a little bit of flexibility there. Or what if we give them more sick days? If we give them more PTO days, if we give them other options that we can take into consideration, and it's not necessarily 100% flexibility, but it is a change in the way of how we treat blue collar workers, which I think should be improved no matter what, whether it's in office or remote or flexible, whatever the case is. There are other ways to make work more flexible rather than just remote and hybrid options. It's in benefits, it's in PTO, it's in all these kind of things. I mean, even discounts around your local restaurants and different things like that. Tires, oil changes. There are so many things that we can come in and be creative on if the company allows us to do that. And again, I don't think it's blue collar versus white collar. I think it's just how we work and how we improve the way that we work. So I'll end it there. Thanks so much for watching this week's Future of Work Weekly Report. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share with anybody who you think might be interested in these series. We have a playlist out there. And as always, you can find the articles in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.